I'm convinced that Elon Musk is many orders of magnitude smarter than I am. But when it comes to predicting who will go bankrupt first, I believe he's wrong. In fact, very wrong. The reason for this is because he's not really looking at this in a global perspective. I don't think so anyway. He's more looking at this in an American-centric perspective when he talks to the US press or people who ask him questions in the United States. But when you actually take a look at the numbers, you'll start to realize that a colossal debt bomb is about to hit one country and all the automakers and all the suppliers and probably pretty much all the manufacturing industry in that country. And it's about to crash the GDP of that country at least 15% and put them into one of the greatest depressions we've seen in global history. Sounds crazy? I know. When you see the numbers, well, you might just agree. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm the Electric Viking. Great to see you. Welcome to all the new subscribers. Welcome back, everyone else. Thank you for tuning in. It's great to see you. And I hope you've had an amazing weekend. I did. My boys went in some BMX races. They did pretty well. The little one was stoked. He's 6, and Cal, he did really well. He won all his races, and Jack did really well as well. He won most of his races, came second in a few of them. It was a good weekend, and guess what? It was sunny. It wasn't pouring with rain, like it's going to be soon in Japan. But before we get to that, here's the key reason why I don't believe Lucid or Rivian will go bankrupt first. There'll be other companies who will hit that first. The key reason is this. Lucid is basically owned by the Saudis. The Saudis, well, they only have one car company, basically, really, that they own. They pretty much own Lucid. And I don't think they're willing to see that company fail anytime soon. So yes, it will incur billions of dollars in debts. But with significant pressure from the Saudis, they will, I believe, trim their costs, end up selling small number of cars at high cost, and basically be one of those kind of companies. I don't see there being an immediate bankruptcy in future for Lucid, as Elon Musk says there probably will be. He also says this about Rivian. In fact, he appears to want Rivian to succeed, but is trying to give them some advice to help them to not go bankrupt, which is kind of nice of him. I do think he's genuinely trying to give them the right advice. But Rivian, they're in the same boat, right? They're owned by Jeff Bezos. He's one of the richest men on the planet. And I don't believe he's willing to see Rivian fail anytime soon. Now, that's my key hypothesis for why those two will probably go bankrupt at some point, but not in the immediate future. Now, the other reason is this. They produce the right powertrain. They both build electric cars. Electric cars are, well, without a doubt, the future of the automotive industry. Whereas many companies with massive debts significantly bigger than those of Lucid and Rivian, produce internal combustion engine vehicles. And on their books right now, they claim to have hundreds of billions in so-called assets. Now, I've got a question for you. Just moving to pick up this. How much money do you think the factory is that makes that? How much money do you think that factory is worth? Do you think it's worth $7 billion? That's the kind of baloney that Toyota, Volkswagen, many car companies are claiming. They're claiming they have enormous amounts of assets because they build cars. Cars that within a few years, nobody will want. Instead of those being an asset, they'll simply be like a noose hanging around their necks. Now, the big problem here is the Japanese automotive industry sells internal combustion engine cars. They do a pretty good job of it. They sell lots of them. They sell many millions. Honda, for example, what do they sell? 4 million cars a year. Used to be more, used to be 5 million. They're about 4 million right now. What about Toyota? About 10 million. What about Nissan? About 3 million. You're looking at many millions of cars here. And the truth is that as a result of decades of automotive industry dominance and decades of building that industry, the Japanese economy has become addicted to internal combustion engine powered vehicles in the same way that a crack addict becomes addicted to crack. They have the same problem. And the problem is this, the supporting infrastructure. Now, when you become a crack addict, eventually, I imagine, you become someone who becomes very dependent on crack. Your network becomes crack addicts. The people you know are crack addicts. Your suppliers are probably crack addicts as well. Maybe the only person who's not a crack addict is the person who manufactures the stuff. That dude's got to have his wits about him, I imagine. That's Japan's problem. The entire country is like one big group of crack addicts. Now, don't get me wrong. I have nothing wrong with the Japanese people. Nothing wrong with the Japanese automotive industry. Well, actually, there is. They're addicts, and they don't know it. And that, my friends, is the big problem. They make many, many millions of internal combustion engine-powered vehicles per year, but everyone around them, their support networks, their dealers, their entire infrastructure of their country is built up around one thing and one thing only. It's very different to every other country on the planet. Now, for example, many countries have an automotive industry. Germany is very dependent on their automotive industry, but no one has anywhere near the dependence on the automotive industry that Japan does. 89% of Japan's GDP comes from manufacturing. 89%. Now, what percentage do you think is made up of the automotive industry? No one exactly knows, but it's massive. And the tentacles go through everything. There are many, many companies that you've probably never heard of that are part of the automotive industry, or you might have heard of, but you just don't think about when you think auto. Bridgestone, I'm sure you've heard of them. Denso, Fuji Heavy Industries, GS Yusa, Honda Motors, Isuzu, JTEKT, Mazda Motor, Mitsubishi Motors, NGK Insulators, Nissan, Sumitomo Electric, Suzuki Motor, Toyota Motor, Yamaha Motor, Yokohama Rubber. And that is just a tiny snippet of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of businesses set up in Japan to support the automotive industry. In particular, to support the sales of internal combustion engine vehicles. Now, Fazad Mesbahi tweeted this: everyone is focusing on Tesla, while most automakers are on the doorstep of bankruptcy. Elon Musk, much closer than they realize. He's right. He knows. You know why he knows? Because Tesla were there themselves. Now, these companies wouldn't know what it's like to be on the doorstep of bankruptcy because they've never been there. But they don't realize the world is in the greatest transition. The greatest transition in history. We're looking at a similar situation to when we went from horse and cart to cars. Now, that disruption actually wasn't as great as this disruption because now there's a lot more people on the planet and there's a lot more cars. In fact, an order of magnitude more cars and an order of magnitude more people. Therefore, this industry is far, far bigger than what the industry was for horse and carts. And guess what? Well, pretty much no one was getting around delivering things in a horse and cart 20 years after the gasoline-powered vehicles and trucks came along. And that's what's happening to the automotive industry. We're going from gasoline-powered vehicles to EVs at an incredible, incredible pace. The world's biggest automotive industry by far. In fact, 1/3 of all cars sold in the world, nearly 1/3, are in China. Do you think the Chinese are going to continue to buy Japanese automotive cars? You know what the Japanese have been saying lately? They've been saying the Chinese have become racist against Japan, and that's why they're no longer buying their cars. There's been massive declines in the sales of, for example, Subaru vehicles, Mazda vehicles, and Honda vehicles in China. They're saying, don't worry, that anti-Japanese sentiment will turn around anytime soon. What the Japanese don't realize is it has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with those vehicles themselves. And that is their key problem. They are unaware of the reality, which is this. It's nothing to do with where the vehicle is necessarily made and everything to do with what it's powered by. The Chinese see the future as electric cars. They see the past as gasoline-powered cars. So here's the key problem. How does Japan bail out their entire automotive industry when it's basically 50% of their economy? They already have enormous debts. In fact, at 266% of GDP, they have the highest debt of any developed nation in the world. You guys in the US, you're always talking about how much debt the US has. It's nothing compared to Japan. And guess what? Japan can't print its way out of this situation. They don't have the ability to simply do what the United States does as being the world's reserve currency. The more money they print, the more inflation they get. Have a look at the Japanese yen. I mean, Every year they seem to add an extra zero to the value of the yen. So let me point this out again. As of September 2022, the Japanese public debt is estimated to be approximately 9.2 trillion US dollars. 9.2 trillion. That's 1.3 quadrillion Japanese yen. It's the highest of any developed nation, and 43.3% of this debt is held by the Bank of Japan. But the bigger problem than that is the inability, at some point in the near future, to pay its debt. Now, if Japan was producing and their economy was growing, well, that would be a different story, but it's not. Japan's asset price bubble collapse in 1991 led to a prolonged period of economic stagnation described as the lost decade, with GDP falling significantly in real terms through the 1990s. In response, the Bank of Japan set out in the early 2000s to encourage economic growth through a non-traditional policy of quantitative easing. By 2013, Japanese public debt exceeded 1 quadrillion yen, or $10.5 trillion, about twice the country's annual gross domestic product at the time, and already the largest debt ratio of any nation on the planet. The public debt of Japan has continued to rise in response to a number of challenges, including but not limited to the global financial crisis in 2007 to 2008, the Tohoku earthquake in 2011, and the COVID-19 pandemic beginning in late 2019, which also held ramifications for Tokyo's hosting of the 2020 Summer Olympics. In August 2011, Moody's rating cut Japan's long-term sovereign debt ratio by one notch to AA3 from AA2, in line with the size of the country's deficit and its borrowing level. The large budget deficits and government debt since the 2008-2009 global recession and the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in March 2011 contributed to the ratings downgrade. In 2012, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development yearbook editorial stated that Japan's debt rose over 200% of GDP, partly as a consequence of the tragic earthquake and the related reconstruction efforts. Former Prime Minister Naito Kan called the situation urgent due to Japan's ballooning, unsustainable debt levels. So here is the issue. The entire Japanese automotive industry is not prepared for the shift to electric cars. They're barely making any at the moment. In fact, more cars are being made for Japan and Japan's automotive industry in China by Chinese-owned car companies in joint ventures with Japanese car companies, but made by the Chinese than the Japanese are actually making themselves. Japan's electric cars represent less than 2% of global electric car output. And the other big problem here is most of Japan's car companies are American-centric. In fact, some of them, you could pretty much call them American brands. Mazda and Subaru are two of those brands. In fact, 70% of all Subarus sold worldwide are sold in North America. 70%. Now the problem here is Subaru and Mazda don't plan on making electric cars in the United States. Therefore, any EVs that they attempt to sell in the US will not qualify for the $7,500 US incentive, nor will the batteries they manufacture, nor will any part of the car. This means that within a matter of only a few years, when the American automotive industry moves to electric cars, as it certainly will, Mazda will likely lose around 50% of its car sales. For example, the same thing will happen to Mazda as what has just happened in China. It's gone from selling thousands of cars to virtually zero in the country. Subaru will have an even bigger problem. Such a huge percentage of their cars are sold in North America, so Subaru will be in a position where they simply lose the United States car market and the Canadian car market, which is 70% of their global car sales. Now, when you add to this the fact that the biggest company in Japan by a mile has more debt than any other company in the world and doesn't make EVs either, or at least at a very minuscule number, then you start to see the problem is massive. Toyota have 190 billion US dollars in debt. 190 billion, and that's more than any other company in the world. Now, without Toyota, the Japanese economy would tank, would simply tank. And Japan knows this. But Japan doesn't have any money. They don't have any money to borrow to bail out anyone, let alone Toyota. Now maybe they can cobble some money together to save Toyota. Personally, I think they're too big and too expensive to save. But who knows? Maybe the Japanese can get together and beg, borrow, and steal enough money to keep Toyota going. But then where is the money going to be to bail out Mitsubishi, Mazda, Nissan, Subaru, and Honda? All of those car companies, at the behest of Toyota themselves, did not take electrification seriously. And frankly, my friends, the Japanese economy, as a result, is going to see one of the greatest depressions in modern history. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe Elon Musk has seen all of this happening. Maybe this is who he's really talking about. Who knows? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.